Hello, welcome back. It's time for me to answer some questions. Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. My name is Paul Mount. Yes, I'm in a slightly different location today. I'm in a location that those of you who've been around the channel for a while might remember. I used to do some of my early videos from my office room. This is where I create everything. Here's a little tour video. This is my office in the house where I do my writing on my laptop, where I store a lot of my collections, where I edit these videos. It all takes place here. This is the hub of my empire, and it all happens here. And I'm recording the video here today because I thought it would be easier for me to call up the questions on my laptop rather than on my iPad or phone or other device, and I could scroll through the questions and answer them as they come up on the screen. Just easier to do it this way than out in the garage. So I thought I would do it here. I'm also recording on the phone's microphone, so not using the usual lapel mic I've been using the last few months. I hope the sound's okay, and I hope there's not too many distracting sounds from outside. I've left it till a little bit later in the evening because the room overlooks the main road through the village. It can be a bit noisy sometimes. There's a car going past now. Hopefully it won't be too distracting for you. So yes, what's this all about then, I hear you ask? Well, this time last week I put up a video, question and answer video, and I thought it might be quite nice, now that I have a substantial number of subscribers, to throw myself open to you and invite any questions that you might have about me personally, my life, my interests, my careers, my work, my film and TV interests, stuff like that. And I was sort of in two minds about doing it because, as I've mentioned before, I'm not really big on the cult of personality on YouTube. But I thought that, well, I've done all these videos, but I haven't said much about me and what I really like and what I'm into, anything about me personally. So there's a chance to open up a little bit, within reason. So I'm very pleased to see that I had quite a lot of questions sent in. I closed off the questions this evening. It's Saturday evening. I closed them off at 6:30. So that's all the questions that we have. And there's quite a few for me to get through. So I hope you'll find this interesting. Hope you won't find it too boring. There's nothing too revealing here. There's just little bits and pieces, nuggets from my past, things I've done in the past, and things I've enjoyed and do enjoy. So yeah, let's crack on with my question and answer session. And in fact, two questions, were asked as the video was debuting last week, premiering last week. So I made a particular note of that because sometimes, as you may know, YouTube comments are hard to find and track down, and this is why I'm on my laptop, because I can get all the comments up, whereas on phones and iPads and so on, sometimes you only get a selection of questions. So the first question I was asked was by a regular viewer, Ardglass Vikings. Hello Ardglass, I don't imagine that's your real name. Very simple first question. First film ever watched in the cinema? That's a bit of a tough one, really. I think, in all honesty, the first cinema experience I can remember, and I know it wasn't my first visit, but the first one I can remember, and I think I've talked about this before, was seeing the very first Doctor Who and the Daleks film in 1965. That is a cinema visit I can remember quite clearly, in fact, because I was on holiday in Torquay with my brother and my parents. The film, I think, had just opened. It was showing in the old ABC theatre or ABC cinema in the middle of Torquay, a fantastic sort of Art Deco building, long since gone, unfortunately, with the steps and pillars. And I just remember going in to see this film in the Daleks in colour on the big screen. And that probably allies with my first memories of Doctor Who, because I clearly had watched Doctor Who and seen the Daleks in the series. I have no memories of that, but I have a very, very clear memory of going to see this film in this beautiful old cinema. So that's my first proper cinema memory, but I'm pretty sure I went to the cinema before then with my brother, with my parents, but I can't remember it. But the Doctor and the Daleks, 1965, is the first one I can specifically and quite clearly remember. Ardglass goes on to ask, you had mentioned you used to DJ. Do you still have a music collection, or was it swapped for other merchandise. Yeah, I DJ'd from 1984 to 2009, a 25-year period. I do like that sort of symmetry in the lengths of time I do things. And I did it because whilst I have no musical talent at all, I love music, and I had a huge collection of records. And this was around the time in the early 80s, late 70s, when I was starting to go night clubbing with my friends. We'd have a few beers, we'd all go off down the disco in our suits. But I would spend a lot of the time just watching the disc jockeys and lurking near the DJ booth and watching them queue up records, because this was before CDs and downloads, kids. And I used to be fascinated by the way they used to do it and queue things up and introduce the records. And I was just fascinated by that skill. And I sort of gravitated into doing it. I started, I don't remember exactly how I got into it. I think I did some work for somebody who was looking for a DJ. I used their equipment for a while. I then sort of went off onto my own, got my own equipment, gathering up my collection of things. And I said I did it for 25 years. Eventually I got a residency in quite a nice hotel on the outskirts of Cardiff. And most of my gigs were there for the last 20 years. And it was very nice because it was, nice crowds, wedding crowds. It was nothing clubby or, Ibiza-y. Although I did, in fact, have the opportunity to go to Ibiza in the mid-80s, I suppose. I think the DJ culture in Ibiza was just starting up. And the guy who used to get me bookings, he was looking for people who would be willing to go over for the summer season to do DJ slots. And I thought about it for a little while, but at the time I had a full-time job and a career, and I wasn't really prepared to take the risk. Who knows what would have happened if I had, Do I have a music collection? I do still have a music collection. I was very certain when I finished in 2009 that was the end of it. I wasn't going to be tempted back. So I got rid of all my equipment fairly quickly, so I couldn't be tempted back, because there was a while when people did say, oh, can you do this party for us? I know you finished this DJing, but can you do this? Can you do that? And I avoided all that by getting rid of the equipment. Got rid of a lot of the vinyl. I've still got quite a bit of the vinyl that I use, but of course, midway through my time of DJing, it was transferring over to CDs. Kept most of my CDs because physical media, I'm a big fan. So I kept lots of my CDs. I got rid of quite a bit, but I still buy the odd CD. But I've still got a lot of the stuff that I used to use when I was DJing, party albums and stuff like that. Nostalgia sort of thing, I suppose. And I did at a time when I was DJing transfer over to mini discs briefly. They appeared to be the next big thing, and I bought a mini disc player, and that was all linked up to my equipment, but they never really caught on, and that faded away quite quickly. So yeah, still got a lot of my music collection, but did get rid of some of the equipment and some of the stuff, so I couldn't be tempted back. Thank you for those questions, Ardglass, much appreciated. Now I shall go over to the tube view to call up the actual questions that we have. These are in no particular order. I wanted to do that one first because it came in as the video was debuting last week. So these are in no particular order, but they just come up. First of all, from Ian Woodward, another regular viewer to the channel. Hi Paul, you have mentioned on several occasions that you have had some involvement in the world of TV production, in particular as an extra. How did that come about, and what was your most enjoyable, memorable experience? It would be fascinating to hear your recollections and favourite memories. Yeah, that's been great fun. I don't do quite so much of it now. Again, it's sort of a period in time when I was doing a lot of that. I started doing it in 2012. I was still in full-time employment at the time, but a new casting agency opened up in the Bay in Cardiff. It was actually called Cardiff Bay Casting. My brother at the time, he worked in that area and he was aware of this. So I joined this agency, and while I was still in work, I did a few days here and there when I could get time off work, a half day here, a half day there. And it was a few months later that I took voluntary redundancy from work, was able to do it a bit more. And I had the confidence to do that because I had this sort of work coming in, and I had some other work coming in from a couple of other things I was doing. And although I still do it, I haven't done much this year, but it's been great. It's been really interesting, really fun. I've met some really good friends who I see regularly, and we swap banter and things on social media. And it's nice when groups of us meet up after a long time. And it's a bit like it is when you've got friends. You sort of don't see them for a while, but you drift back into the relationship that you used to have with them. Some great experiences, though, the things that I've done. And I've been lucky, I think, in that I've not just been a background extra. I have had a chance to do a bit more up front and in front of the camera. Not so much in terms of dialogue and speeching and stuff like that, but acting in a lot of crime reconstruction things, that fairly low budget crime things that appear on channels like CBS Reality, and I think there's a couple on ITVX at the moment. There's one called Wrongly Accused that I appeared in, where you get to play a character and reenact a real life criminal situation. So I've played John Wayne Gacy, the notorious American serial killer, twice in 2 different productions, and had screen credits for doing it, which is something I never expected to do, and something a lot of extras or supporting artists never get, because most of the time as an extra you're just sitting deep background or standing in the background. I've done loads of things where I've spent a day or 2 on productions and, oh, there's my elbow there, oh, I was standing behind that man there, you can just see my hair. And that's a lot of what extra work is all about. But by networking and making connections, I've been able to do a lot of these crime type things. I think the only things I've done this year would be, I think I did in January, which is quite nice. Some things you do, you never hear any more of them because they are student things or proposal things. A lot of filmmakers do a reel, which is a proposal for a project, which they try to interest production companies and studios into making. And I did something which was reconstructing a court case, and I played a character, and I had a script and was reading it out. And that was good fun to do. I was also cast in a speaking role in a music video a few years back, and they were just looking for somebody to say a few lines as the owner of a club, and the director said, do you want to have a few words of dialogue? I was like, yes please, I'll do that. So little things like that make it good fun to do. But I've done things like Broadchurch, the first season of Broadchurch, with that was a really nice day because it was in a school in Clevedon, and if you've seen Broadchurch, I think it's episode 4, where practically the entire cast are in it, and I think David Tennant is the detective. He's addressing the people in the village, telling them how the investigation into the murder of the young boy is getting on, and the whole cast were there. Olivia Colman, David Tennant, David Bradley, Will Mellor, Pauline Quirk, Karen Pickles, Jodie Whittaker. Of course, at the time we didn't know she was going to end up being Doctor Who, and that was really nice because you're in the middle of all this, and I seem to remember from the episode I had a couple of sort of close-ups as the camera drifted across the crowd. So yeah, loads of good fun times doing extra work, and I'm not saying I'll never do it again, but I did a thing last year called The Way, which was directed by Michael Sheen, which wasn't very good, but I was just one of the crowd and was picked out to sort of sit at the front of this meeting, and I was supposed to be one of the people that organised the meeting. Only a couple of shots of me, but it was quite nice. It's quite nice to do those sorts of things, but not a lot this year. I just haven't really chased up the opportunities this year, but I'm sure I'll go back to it at some point. But I think YouTube's taking up a lot of my time at the moment, you guys. So I hope that was okay, Ian. Hope that filled you in a little bit. I mean, there's lots of sort of odds and sods and stories and things that wouldn't be that interesting to many people, but it was fun for me at the time. Next we have Graham 70694. Interesting name, Graham. Great idea to do this, buddy. Really looking forward to your answers. My question is a bit dull, but I'd be curious to know what is your most rarest piece of cult TV merchandise that you own? I'll go to that first because it's a 2-part question. Yeah, this is an interesting one. I think there might be a similar question a bit further down. I'm not entirely sure. I have to say it's a bit of a dull answer, unfortunately. I don't really have many rare pieces of cult TV merchandise. I think part of that's because when I was a kid in the 60s and into the 70s, this stuff was ephemeral, wasn't necessarily collectible. You'd have toys and books and magazines and bits and pieces and comics. You didn't think, oh, I'm going to keep this because this will be valuable in 30, 40 years' time. You just had it, did what you're supposed to do with it. If it was a toy, you used it until it broke. If it was a book or a comic, you read it until it fell apart, and then you went on and moved on to something else. So I never really collected things with a view to them being collectibles later on. Now, in more recent years, I have revisited the past a bit and picked up things because they're nostalgic. I think as you get older, you don't connect quite so much in terms of ownership of things, new things, because they are very much ephemeral these days. But getting older, you do sort of reach back to the past when you were a bit younger. So I've picked up things like old comics that I used to read back in the 70s and the 60s, just samples of the old things, just as a fix of nostalgia, really. But I suppose in terms of anything connected to anything at all, I'm quite fond of, or never let go of, this little baby. This is a police box. It's not a TARDIS though. This is a police box model which predates Doctor Who. It's a dinky toy, but it is, as you can tell from the badges and stuff, which aren't Doctor Who accurate. This is a police box. It's even got police rather than police box. It's not Doctor Who accurate. But I had this as a kid when I was getting into Doctor Who. And this was my gateway to doing my own little Doctor Who stories. I used to have little figures from various toys and soldiers and knights and things. There was one particular figure who had like a red cloak, and that was John Pertwee's Doctor to me, even though he didn't look like him. And I would do little, adventures, desktop adventures. This is something I would never get rid of, because this takes me right back to my childhood. It might even, as I'm thinking of it, might even be my brother's, but I apprehended it and used it, and it's on my mantelpiece downstairs now with several other police boxes and Daleks and so on. But this is my oldest piece of cult merchandise, which ironically isn't actually cult merchandise. And Graham also picks up on the DJ theme. Oh, and in another track you mentioned you were a DJ a few years back. I was wondering also, what was the first band you saw live? What was the first record you purchased? Wow. First band I saw live. This might be slightly embarrassing. The first band I can remember seeing live. I've never been a massive gig goer. I think I probably am more these days than I was when I was younger, because I can afford it a bit more. And I do like to see lots of the older bands who are back on the circuit doing things. Not a big fan of the massive stadium concerts and stuff. I found that a bit overwhelming. Although I did go and see Coldplay a couple of years ago. It's fantastic. I don't care what you say. Coldplay, fantastic. I think the first gig I can remember going to, probably 1978, I went to see Hot Chocolate, the popular beat combo of the 70s and into the 80s, who were playing at, I think it was a student union gig in Cardiff, the old student union building. And a couple of friends of mine were, I wouldn't say fans of Hot Chocolate, but we knew a lot of their songs. We got tickets to trundle along there. My main memory from the concert is that Errol Brown, the lead singer, fell off the stage and split his trousers. Fool. So that's the first concert I can remember going to, as you would term a pop concert as such. Later on, I had a friend who was into sort of slightly heavier music, and I went to see Judas Priest. That I'm sure made my ears bleed. When I came out of the concert, my ears were killing me. I'm sure they were bleeding. Went to see Susie and the Banshees. I saw Toya in Cardiff. I've seen Simple Minds. I saw them back in the 80s and again more recently. 10cc are probably the band I've seen the most, because they were the band in the 70s that really got me into music properly. So in terms of the first record that I purchased, I'm going to say purchased with my own money. I think it might be something by the Monkees in the 1960s. Everybody else was into the Beatles. I was into the Monkees because they were fun and they had adventures and they were lads. I think I remember buying Daydream Believer, which I think was a #1 hit in the UK. I can remember vaguely being in a record shop and buying that, whether it was bought for me or whether I had my own money, I'm not entirely sure. But that's the sort of first record I can remember owning. Thank you for that, Graham. We shall return to the questions. A message from the Gas Monster. I've actually responded to this online to the Gas Monster, but I'll mention it here. Hi Paul, back in the day, the late 1980s, I was a member of the Cardiff Dwas Doctor Who Appreciation Society local group, which was an offshoot of the Swansea local group. I'm surprised our paths didn't cross. Were you involved in local fan groups, clubs at all in South Wales? I know organised fandom isn't everyone's cup of tea, just curious. Certainly isn't my cup of tea these days. I was actually around in the early days of Doctor Who fandom in the late 70s when the DWAS was just starting up, doing its first conventions. I think I went to their second ever convention in Imperial College in 1978. I did go to a couple of local group meetings, I think in Newport, but then I teamed up with a couple of other fans who attended these things because they tended to be a bit raucous. We formed our own trio, not a group, but we did our own thing. We published a fan magazine, the Doctor Who Review, which ran for a while and went down quite well. We got involved in a research project looking at the history of Doctor Who, and that sort of that group became involved in the early days of research into TV programmes. We started researching old TV shows, classic TV shows, sort of stuff I cover on this channel. And thanks to stuff like that, I got involved with writing for Starburst. By doing a set visit to the Tripods, the BBC science fiction series, which I covered on a video way back there, which is very popular. I did a visit to the set there, and that sort of set me off on the road to writing for magazines. So I think by the time I was doing all that, Doctor Who was sort of drifting out of popularity and eventually went off air in the late 80s. And I just wasn't involved in fandom, and I didn't really want to get involved in the group thing because I used to hear tales of dissent and arguments and rows and backstabbing and bitchiness, and I can't be bothered with any of that. And next up we have, thank you for that question, by the way, from the Gas Monster. Next up we have Julie K352. Hi Paul, really enjoy your channel. As a viewer of a certain age, I would get home from school and station myself in front of the TV to find out what was happening on Dark Shadows, and then hope for something good on the 4 o'clock movie. To me, Dark Shadows shares many qualities with early classic Doctor Who. Not a huge budget, occasionally shaky sets, filmed practically live to tape, some of the monster makeup and style, etc. Did you ever get a chance to see Dark Shadows, especially when it started having scarier, classic horror-inspired storylines? What was your must-watch after-school show or shows? First of all, in relation to Dark Shadows, I know that this was a very popular soap opera in America. It was an afternoon show which ran for several years, a horror soap opera. Imagine that. But I don't think it ever made the journey across to the UK. I may be wrong. It may have been shown on some satellite channel years later, but certainly it wasn't a prime time show over here. And I don't think I ever got to see any episodes. I've seen one or two since because the whole set has been released on DVD in the UK, and I think there was a Best of Barnabas Collins DVD. I've certainly seen some of it, but not much of it, not enough to give an opinion on it really. And of course I saw the Tim Burton film a few years back, which I think skewed a bit more towards comedy and didn't capture what I gathered to be the flavour of the show itself. So unfortunately I've not seen a lot of Dark Shadows. I would like to at some point, but maybe something I'll cover on this channel. If Julie, you're watching, if there are some selected episodes you think would represent the series that might give me an idea of the broad scope of the show, let me know in the comments here and I'll see if I can get hold of them. Cheers, Julie. She also asks, what was your must-watch after-school show or shows? Again, many of the shows I've talked about on this channel, things like Time Slip, The Tomorrow People, Sky, Freewheelers, lots of these adventure science fiction serials, they're all part of my growing up and encouraging my imagination and getting me interested in science fiction and the genre as a whole. You used to have loads of these things. We really were spoiled for choice. ITV in particular used to do loads of them. Not so many on the BBC that I can recall, but ITV used to do these shows. Time Slip and The Tomorrow People, and as I said, all things that really sparked my imagination, and they were the ones I would sort of rush home to see in the early 70s. Here we go. We have Daryl McCorfey. Hi Paul, love the channel. One of the best on YouTube. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to say that. What is your favourite decade overall in terms of TV and movie output? Again, that's a difficult one because I think as you get older, you look back with rose-tinted spectacles perhaps at the things you watched when you were a kid. And when you watch them again, they're not quite so good. I tend to find the stuff that I watched is just as good as when I watched it, although you're aware that it's not as sophisticated as the stuff we get these days. So I think naturally for me, I'm going to go for the 60s because that's when we had the explosion of imagination with Doctor Who, Star Trek, all the Jerry Anderson shows. There were so many other things that were around, bubbling away. I've got fond memories of the 70s. I think into the 80s, things drifted a bit. But I think the 21st century, as people interested in, or as a person interested in fantasy or genre television, we're very well served in the 2010s. And we were in the 20s. There's a lot of very good stuff out there. Too much to watch all of, to be fair. But I think for nostalgic reasons, I'm going to say the 1960s because that's where it all started for me. Thank you for that one. Moving on. This is from Koiklud, who says, hi Paul, after your recent video on what happened to Doctor Who, how do you feel about the Star Trek franchise? I'm a big fan of both Who and Trek, and there's also been a lot of unpopular directions the Trek franchise has taken over the last several years, as well as Who. There is a chance that Trek on TV could also be pausing soon, with Paramount merging with Skydance. Any opinion from you would be very welcome. As we will discover from another question that comes up soon, I am not a massive fan. I quite like Star Trek. I can watch Star Trek, especially the original series. That was my original interest because, of course, that came along in the 60s when Doctor Who was off the air. Star Trek went off and filled the slot. But I'm not a big fan of space science fiction. I prefer stories about the human condition in the contemporary world and how ordinary people deal with the extraordinary. Spaceships, lasers, ray guns. Yeah, I can watch it, but it doesn't engage me in the same way. So I like some of Star Trek. I like the original Star Trek. I will hold my hand up and say I never watched The Next Generation. I never watched Deep Space Nine. I never watched Enterprise. Tried to watch Discovery. Couldn't get into it. I quite like Strange New Worlds. I'm a bit behind on that. I've got to finish off the second season and start the third season. But the reason I like that is because it is like classic Trek. And I think when Star Trek isn't like classic Trek, it isn't really Star Trek. It becomes something else. As for the future, yeah, there are all sorts of issues possibly now with Paramount. I think Star Trek might be in a similar position to Doctor Who, where it could benefit from a bit of a break, because sometimes you can go on mining the same furrow and eventually you sort of run out of ground and run out of steam and the audience loses interest. I don't know if Star Trek is there yet. I know there's some new Star Trek stuff coming up. I haven't watched any of the animated things, Below Decks. There's a Starfleet Academy thing coming up soon, which I might take a look at, but Star Trek isn't my go-to place for science fiction. But I think Doctor Who, still, Star Trek is a show that can and will be reinvented. And somebody will always come along and think, oh, Star Trek, that's a good idea, let's do something with that. Next up, we have from Dave PX1. What's your first sci-fi memory? And if, as I imagine for lots of us, it's Doctor Who, what's your second? And did anything else clinch an early fondness for the genre or similar material? I suppose it would be Doctor Who, but I can't be specific about which episode. I certainly remember quite clearly, although I don't remember the episodes as such, but I remember because it was Bonfire Night 1966. It was Patrick Troughton's first episode. I had the measles, so I couldn't go outside to watch my father letting off fireworks because I was always a big firework fan. And I do remember being on my mother's knee. I was 26 at the time. I can remember being on my mother's knee, looking out the window as my father's letting off fireworks and sort of glancing back towards Doctor Who. So I know I watched Power of the Daleks, and I clearly, because of my experience with the Doctor Who Dalek film, I knew of the Daleks in the series, but I don't remember watching any particular earlier episodes. I do remember watching things like Supercar and Fireball XL5, the early Jerry Anderson shows in the early 60s. I can remember watching them, so they would probably be my earliest science fiction memory. I mean, very unsophisticated stuff compared to the stuff that Jerry did later on. But those were shows that I know that I watched around that time as well. Did anything else clinch an early fondness for the genre or similar material? I think it probably would be the Jerry Anderson shows. I loved Stingray onwards, Captain Scarlet, Thunderbirds, of course, particularly Thunderbirds. And I'm very much looking forward to get my hands on that new proper Blu-ray set which Anderson Entertainment's bringing out in October. So I think it was those three in combination with Doctor Who, and probably things like Batman as well. Even though Batman was more of a campy adventure series, I think that got me into comic books. I started picking up DC comics, Superman and Batman, all these things at the time. So I think a potpourri of all those things together made me a fan of the genre. And then into the 70s, I think exposure to all the classic science fiction and horror films, courtesy of those much remembered BBC Two classic double bills, which I was fortunate enough that my parents let me sit up to watch the old Universal horror films and the Hammer films, and then they dug deeper into more older science fiction films, and that, that was just catnip to my imagination. So it was all that sort of stuff, really, I would say. But thank you for that. Bernard Platypus, I bet that's not your real name, is it, Bernard? He says, you may have noticed the lack of science fiction fantasy productions actually being reviewed and raved about in mainstream media. I'm sorry, but Game of Thrones, the KOs, I'm not sure what that is, and zombie stuff do not count, and Doctor Who is too soapy for me. So my question is, do you think the mainstream media still has a dislike for science fiction? And why is it when anything remotely good in science fiction does get good, it is still ignored? Absolutely, yes. Mainstream media doesn't like science fiction, doesn't understand science fiction, thinks it's weird, and thinks that the people who watch it are weird. Occasionally, they will give it the time of day when it crosses over. Things like the X-Files, which become popular mainstream successes. That, I think, was more threaded around the sort of conspiracy theory paranoia of the late 1990s, pre-millennium, and I think that sparked off an interest in people. And I think that the critical community and the mainstream media took it seriously, because although there were creatures and monsters in it, it was more of a mystery, horror type series. And I think that was something which crossed over to people on the media. They took it more seriously. But no, I think you're right. Any fantasy shows these days are very much considered niche, which is why we don't get them on mainstream television anymore. They're expensive and they don't apparently pull in huge audiences unless they do crossovers. Things like Doctor Who, The X-Files, Star Trek will cross over and become part of the zeitgeist. But I think that otherwise it's just dismissed as hokum. Certainly broadsheet newspapers and magazines and stuff will just sort of be a bit tongue-in-cheek about it and don't take it seriously, which is really frustrating because, as we all know, some of the best storytelling and productions are in the genre, but the media, it's a bit hands-off, an arm's length, which is such a shame. Thank you for that one, Bernard Platypus, not your real name. Rob, the old mongoose, comes along and says, would you be interested in a Wilderness Years set for Doctor Who in the style of the collection box sets? Yeah, absolutely. If there's material, let's see it. I love the Doctor Who Blu-ray sets. Hugely looking forward to season 13, which I believe is out in September? October? I'm not sure. It's out soon anyway. They're fantastic. They are the best physical media representations of TV in the world. And I'd be interested in the Wilderness Years set because there was a lot of stuff going on. BBC did a few bits and pieces. I'm sure you could gather up lots of the spin-offs that were being done by licensed characters, low-budget dramas and stuff. It would be interesting to see what they were doing. It'd be nice to have interviews with the people who did this sort of stuff and interviews with people who behind the scenes were perhaps working on trying to get Doctor Who back on air. But yeah, with Doctor Who off the air now for a while, anything interesting about Doctor Who I would be very keen on seeing. Then we have from Denny Haynes 3, another regular viewer. 2 questions. Have you watched Finch on Apple TV, post-apocalyptic film? I actually replied to Denny online. The Tom Hanks film that came out 2 or 3 years ago. I have watched that. It's very good. Very interesting apocalyptic film, which, as I recall, is about a man who has a dog and he knows he's dying, but he wants to make sure his dog lives on happily after him. And he gets involved with a slightly irritating robot when they form a bond, and he needs to be sure that his dog is going to be safe after he dies. It's a good one. Check it out if you can. Second question, do you have any memories of the live-action Filmation productions like Jason of Star Command and Arc 2? I actually meant to look at this up before I did the video. I remember Filmation as an animation studio. I don't remember particularly their live-action shows. Again, I think a lot of these things didn't make their way over to British television, so I am aware of the names. Arc 2 rings a bell. Is that a Gene Roddenberry one, or is that Genesis 2? I'm not sure. So I know of these things, but they didn't cross my path, unfortunately, so I can't really say much more about them. But I am aware of them, but I haven't seen them. We have 2 questions from Gordon Williams, another regular viewer. Hello, Gordon. 2 questions. You mentioned you were a DJ. How did you get into it? And was it at the same time as being a lawyer? This actually touches on bits that I mentioned before. I got into DJing, as I said, because I used to go to clubs and I used to like watching the DJs. And I was fascinated by using the records and mixing the records, although I didn't mix a lot when I started doing it. And yeah, I was actually in full-time employment. I wasn't a lawyer at the time. I didn't become a lawyer until 94. And I started DJing about 10 years before that. So I had an office job in the legal profession, and I was a DJ on weekends. And I carried on doing it after I became a lawyer until, as I mentioned, I started to lose interest a bit. Do you have a favourite band? Coldplay. Or are your tastes eclectic? Coldplay are my #1 band. In terms of the taste, I'm quite populist, really. I'm not into R&B or rap, particularly not rap. Not into jazz, classical. I just like pop music, really, like a good song. So it depends on what the song is rather than who's singing it. Coldplay are my #1. I will buy their new albums on day of release because I know that there's just something about them, their music and their lyrics and their arrangements just speaks to me. 10cc were a band I loved in the 70s. I like Simple Minds. I went to see them in concert a couple of years ago. So I would say that, yeah, my tastes are eclectic, but within the broad sort of good pop song area. I like a good song, basically. Noise, I'm not into heavy metal, too noisy. I just like a good song you can hear the words to, basically. How is the fitness regime coming along? I was inspired when you started and lost 1.5 stone. But more than I've done. It's going all right, actually. I'm sort of not losing vast amounts of weight regularly, but I'm losing a couple of pounds every week or couple of weeks. I am now diabetic. I've been diabetic for a while. Unfortunately, my diabetic reading, although I'm still in type 2, diabetic numbers are climbing, so I'm on increased medication. I'm trying to get out and do a bit more exercise. I've had a bit of problems with my legs in the last few months. I thought my knees were going. I used to do a lot of running when I was younger. And I used to go on lots of walks locally because we've got lovely parks and areas around where I now live. But I just haven't been able to do it. I haven't been able to get out because after 100 yards or so I have to sit down again because my legs were hurting. I have been to see a chiropractor who was recommended by a friend of mine who has told me that it's not my knees, it's the soft tissue and muscles at the backs of my knees that have been causing problems. So I've had a couple of sessions of treatment with him. So much better already. I can get out, do a bit more. I've got another session coming up in a couple of weeks' time. I'm just going to go once a month now, sort of a top up. But my legs feel a lot better. So I'm hoping to find a bit of time to squeeze in. And I've done one or two shorter walks. But I'm hoping now as we edge into the autumn to get out a bit more and get out there and walk around a bit more. And hopefully, combined with my diet, I've got a terrible sweet tooth. It's my terrible letdown. I buy sugar-free biscuits. But I do like that rush that you get from a chocolate. So I'm hoping that I'm sort of getting there by increments rather than huge, massive weight losses. But well done, Gordon, on losing 1.5 stone. That's never easy. Coming up next, we have Geeky Sci-fi TV, H208. Wonder who that could be. What is your favourite article or piece of work you have ever written for Starburst magazine? Well, David, I think, having thought about it, there are probably two. I was going to try and dig out the issues, but they're in a box somewhere and I couldn't be bothered. I think one would probably be, and I can't remember the issue number, 176 or something, when I first started writing for Starburst in 1985. Not that it's the best piece I've ever written. The thing is, I've written so much stuff over 2 distinct periods for Starburst. I can't remember half of it now. But I feel quite proud of the very first piece that was published, which was an interview with John Shackley, who is the star of the TV series Tripods. As I mentioned, I've been to visit the set and interview the cast. I wrote up the interviews. They were actually intended for a fan magazine called Fantasy Empire. I think it was a magazine published by the people who took over Starburst, who were called Visual Imagination. And all of a sudden, they took over Starburst from Marvel, because Marvel had dumped the magazine. Visual Imagination took it over. Suddenly an issue came out with a big colour picture from the Tripods, and my interview is a central feature. And I was proud of that, although it wasn't the first thing I'd had in a magazine. I'd had 1 or 2 pieces in another magazine, whose name eludes me for the moment. But this was my first sort of big splash feature, and I'm proud of that because I found myself drifting into sort of magazine writing, and it was nice to actually get something in quite a well-known magazine. I suppose the other piece, which is a favourite, was back in 2012 when Jerry Anderson died towards the end of the year, and Mike, who was the editor of Starburst at the time, asked me if I would be interested in writing a fairly lengthy tribute piece for him for the next issue. I was honoured to be asked to do that because Jerry was, as I've said, an important creator from my youth, and it was very handy to be given this particular job to do because this happened just before Christmas. It was a difficult festive period for me personally, and it was New Year's Eve and I was on my own for the first time. I wasn't going out. My mother, who I'd been sort of caring for, was in hospital, so I, instead of just sitting at home being miserable watching Auld Lang Syne, I was working on this article. I was researching. I had lots of books that I had. I was piecing this thing together and I was quite pleased with it. Looking back at it now, and I haven't done for a while, I know there's 1 or 2 factual errors, but those are things that have since been corrected from the original text. So I think that's a favourite because it's about somebody who is important to me and I wanted to get it right. And it was quite a long piece, over 12 pages or so, and I think they made a good job of making it look good. So I'm quite pleased with that. So I think that one and the first one were probably the ones that I'm most proud of are our favourites, although as I said, there's so much stuff and will be more. I can't remember a lot of it now. I enjoyed doing lots of interviews. It was nice to talk to Jeff Wayne from War of the Worlds. One of my great regrets there. I had a lovely chat with him, and I mentioned that I was going to see the War of the Worlds show, and he came to Cardiff in December, and he said to me, well, when you come along, because he was such a lovely man, when you come along, he said, leave your name at the box office, tell them to pass it on to me. When the show's over, you can come backstage, meet the cast, and see how we do it all. And I thought, that's fantastic, that'll be brilliant. Unfortunately, I'd interviewed him in May, the show was in December, and by the time I got to December, I thought, he's not going to remember me now, he's not going to know who I am, he's done so many interviews, so many shows, he's not going to remember, and I stupidly let the moment pass, and I do regret that. But I did lots of interviews and things which I really enjoyed. I used to go up to London once I'd finished full-time work to do press screenings and press interview sessions, one with the cast of Captain America, Civil War, Lord of the Rings, Guardians of the Galaxy, just the press big junkets. I don't think they have them to that extent post-COVID. But yeah, I enjoyed doing all that, but those two particular things I think were my ones that were sticking in my mind. You get to be the next Doctor Who showrunner. Who'd you cast as the Doctor companion, and what tone would you set for your first season? Well, Geeky Sci-fi TV, David, I'm not going to answer that here because that is going to be a video which I'm going to do in the next week or so. Having just done a video about where Doctor Who went wrong, I'm going to do one about where or what I would like Doctor Who to do when it comes back. It'll be a purely personal one from my viewpoint, picking things from the past of Doctor Who which I'd like to see them do again in a modern style. And this is something I actually thought about before you asked the question, so I would never answer that question here because those ideas are percolating about what will probably be my last big Doctor Who video for a time, because I don't want to keep doing videos which look like Doctor Who clickbait. I only do Doctor Who videos if I've got something to say or announce or talk about. So yeah, that will be coming up in the next week, 2 weeks hopefully. My ideas for the future of Doctor Who. Thanks for those, David. Couple of questions from Outside Inside 9990. Oh, I should have looked at this properly. Right, what are your top 5 TV shows of all time? Okay, in no particular order. And I think having said no particular order, I think Doctor Who's got to be the top, really, because of what it means and how long it's been with me. So that's in my top 5. Survivors, the original BBC 1975 to 77 series, is one of my favourites. Time Slip, the fantastic time travel series from 1970, which I've done a video on here on this channel. In more recent shows, I'm going to say Dexter. Dexter, which is still with us after about 11, 12 seasons. Absolutely brilliant, absurd, balmy drama series, quite gory and gritty, about a serial killer who kills serial killers. He's a good guy under the mask of a bad guy. I just love that series. It's on now Friday nights on Paramount, new episodes, and it's a highlight of the week. Absolutely love that series. It is magnificent. 5th, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I suppose. I absolutely love Buffy the Vampire Slayer, even though it came along and I was way outside its age range. The writing, the energy, the creativity in the storytelling, the emotions, the highs and lows, great stuff. I think it was at its best in its first 5 seasons. But having said that, season 6 had one of the best TV episodes of all time in Once More with Feeling, the musical episode. Yeah, but I love Buffy, and I am sceptical, should we say, about this remake or continuation, which is just about to go into production. But we shall see. I'll give it a fair crack of the whip. My favourite and least favourite film you've ever seen. My favourite film is The Wicker Man. I don't think I have to say any more about that. The original, of course, not the Nicolas Cage one. The 1973 classic with Christopher Lee, Edward Wood, directed by Robin Hardy, is just a magnificent masterpiece of a film. And I can always remember the first time I watched it when it was on TV years later on a Sunday night. And I'd heard of it but didn't know much about it. And I remember watching it. And when it ended, I was thinking, did that just happen in that film? Fantastic, stunning masterpiece film. Absolutely love it. My least favourite film I've ever seen. The new War of the Worlds with Ice Cube, which has just debuted on Amazon, is a contender because that's a real stinker. I don't know, to be honest. I think there's something to recommend in most films. I think you have to admire the fact that people have made a film, even if it turns out to be a bad film. I think one of the worst films I've ever seen was Battleship, which came out, I can't remember when now, 10 years ago maybe. I went to see that in London. I was in London for a few days and I went to the cinema in the afternoon to see it. Absolutely appalling. Dreadful. It was based on the game Battleship, but it was just terrible. It was an awful film. I'm sure I've seen worse, but I think the bad ones sort of fade away and you tend to focus on the ones that you really liked. What was the first Doctor Who story you ever watched? I think I touched on that earlier. The first one I can remember watching, although I can't remember watching it, being in front of the TV, was Power of the Daleks in 1966. I clearly saw it before that. I think I may have very tiny recollections of the Celestial Toy Maker, but I wouldn't like to swear to it. But I was certainly watching Doctor Who around that time, but I can specifically remember that image of me with measles watching my father lighting fireworks with Doctor Who being on, although I can't remember what was on the screen. So that was the first one that I watched. The first one I watched, I think, as a fan who wasn't going to miss it in future, was Spearhead from Space in 1970. That was cemented my interest and love in Doctor Who. Thank you for that question. Outside, we then move on to Anomalo Karis 42. Apologies if I've mangled that. Are there any scenes or images that have stuck with you for your whole life? Things that still put a shiver up your spine after all these years? For me, it was the tentacled octopus monster from the Dragon's Domain episode of Space in 1999. That terrified me as a child, and it still works today, even though you can see the strings. That's difficult because I don't scare easily, as I think I mentioned before. I find things that make me squirm and icky. I've seen a couple of horror films recently which have got some body horror images that are a bit, but they don't necessarily scare me. Too rough memories, perhaps. I can remember an episode of Time Slip where a character in the second story, The Time of the Icebox, Dr. Edith Joynton, played by Peggy Thorpe Bates. God, my mind is full of this stuff. She's taking a longevity drug which prolongs life. She's supposed to be like 200, but she looks about 60. And if something goes wrong with the dosage, an alarm goes off and she collapses. And the end of the episode, I remember very clearly being freaked out by, is her face suddenly wrinkled and ancient, lying there with her hair like straw. That was scary for me as a 10-year-old or something like that. I can remember that quite well. And there was another thing which scared me from a series that no longer exists, that nobody will remember. It's a series called The Master. This was screened in the 60s. I say it doesn't exist. I can remember very little about it, apart from the fact that it was this villain called the Master, not the Doctor Who Master, obviously, on an island off Scotland, and people were on this island. He kidnapped people and he disintegrated them. He had like a disintegrator beam. And I can remember quite a graphic image of people being disintegrated, and you would see these piles of smoking ash that had been people disintegrated and turned to ash. Even though I haven't seen the show since it went out, I know nothing about it, and there's hardly anything online about it. That image of people being disintegrated and turned to smoking ash freaked me out as a child. Since then, I don't think there's anything really that freaks me out. I think when you see monsters and things on films these days, and when you're interested in stuff, you become more aware of the artifice of it and how it's all done and how it's all made. So it doesn't really have the impact anymore. I can't think of the last time I saw an image that made me go, whoa, that was really nasty. Having said that, as soon as I stop recording, I'll probably think of something. Thank you for that one, Anomalo Karis. Next one's nice and easy from Paul Chiesa, another regular viewer. Is Doctor Who your favourite TV programme of all time? Yes, I think it is. The thing about Doctor Who, it is so up and down. It can be great, then it can be disappointing, then it can be outright terrible, then it can be quite good, then it can be absolutely brilliant again. It's all over the place throughout its 60-odd years. Whereas other series come and go, and they're great for the period that they're on, but it may be only one season or two seasons and so on. But I think Doctor Who, again, because it's right at the very core of my being in a way, and even at this age, I still love Doctor Who, faults and all, warts and all. And when it comes back, I'll be watching it. I just hope I live long enough to see it when it comes back. There's a thought. So yeah, it is Doctor Who because it's given me so much over the years. It sort of got me into writing. I've had some Doctor Who short stories published. I've written a book about a monster from Doctor Who. So it's led me down different paths and things. So I think I have to honour it by saying, you're the tops, Doctor. Thank you for that one. And where are we next? Leslie Sugargold 5002 says, Survivors, any chance we can see the longer cut of the overview video that was mentioned 7 times in your most recent video? How about an episode by episode review series? Yes, that's a difficult one, because when I record a video, they go on and on and on sometimes, and I do edit them down, and sometimes bits get cut out that I'd like to have kept in, or bits get taken up because I've cocked it up or got something wrong. So I boil them down to the essence, and I try to keep them to about 20 minutes, because I know, attention spans, and there's so much stuff you guys want to do. You don't want to watch me talking for an hour. He says, conscious that this video has gone on for 52 minutes. So yeah, when I edit a video, the excise footage disappears, I'm afraid, so there is no longer edit available. Episode by episode review series, I mean, I could do that quite happily for Survivors. I don't know how many people will be interested in it. I tend to keep my reviews and things generic, which is why I started the First Impressions series, so I could do the first episode of the series. But if people wanted me to do episode by episode reviews, I'm happy to think about doing that. I know I do the Doctor Who retrospectives, but that's of a particular serial, and obviously Doctor Who serials are all very different. So something I will certainly do, and I'm always up for writing about Survivors and talking about Survivors. So yep, that's not impossible. Craig Tucker 9441, another regular viewer. Which TV show of the past do you think would work for a reboot? Again, it's a difficult one. I'm wary of reboots in a way. I'd rather see new ideas and new things come along rather than just digging back into the past. A lot of my favourite shows have been rebooted one way or another. We had Survivors was rebooted by the BBC a few years back. Didn't really work. I quite liked it, and certainly the second series it found its feet. But I sort of thought, well, first series, original series is so good, why have you gone back to that? Tomorrow People, another one that's been rebooted a couple of times in the 1990s with a new children's series on ITV, and then that rather hopeless American series from a few years back that only lasted 1 year. I think the trouble is with rebooting old series is they were made at a certain cultural point, a certain creative point, which isn't here anymore. Things have to change. And I think if you do a reboot of anything from the 60s and 70s, it won't have that innocence or naivety about it, because the world we live in today, and we know where this is leading, but I'm not going to go there, it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't have the same flavour about it. I suppose the one that has some potential would be Blake 7, I think. An interesting new version of that could be done with new special effects. But having said that, the Blu-ray box sets that are coming out have got some great new special effects. I just suppose a big budget version of it would tell the story on a bigger visual canvas. But again, it's been done and it was fine at the time. New things would be great, and I really would like to see a lot more new stuff. And I think TV is delivering some good new stuff. So that is what I think of that. Thank you very much for Craig Tucker. Gary Jones 8456. Hi Paul, love the channel, the best on YouTube. Oops, didn't mean to read that one out. Questions. Favourite season of Doctor Who? Season 7, John Pertwee's first season, perfecto. Closely followed by season 13, Tom Baker's second season, which is the next Blu-ray box set. Have you listened to Big Finish audios? I've listened to some of them. I'm not an audio drama person, really. No disrespect to Big Finish. I'm sure they serve a purpose, particularly amongst fans who aren't really into the new Doctor Who, because they do lean heavily into the continuity from the past of Doctor Who. So, and I do find, and I've listened to them, I do find after a while they sort of dissolve into lots of bangs and crashes and screaming and sound effects, and they just don't hold my attention. But they're very well done. They're brilliantly made, but not for me. Are you going to continue to write for Starburst? I am indeed going to continue to write for Starburst. I've stopped writing my monthly, in fact quarterly TV Zone column. I just felt it was time. I'd been doing it now for 14 years since the magazine came back, and I had a 10-year period, 86 to 96. I just feel that it needs a new eye, because I'm getting a bit older, and a lot of the shows I'm talking about aren't aimed at me, and I think it just needs a new look. It is a bit like, as I said, with being a DJ, the last few years of being a DJ was more of an obligation than something I enjoyed, and I don't want writing columns for Starburst to be like that. And it was starting to get a little bit like that, even though it was only every 3 months. It was a bit, I've got to write a column. When I did it, it was fun, and I always enjoyed making it fun. I hope it never read as if I was struggling to do it. But I think I would probably reach that point. I do wish now I'd stayed on for another year for that symmetry of 15 years instead of 14 years. But hey, it's done now. So yeah, I'll still be writing. I will still be doing some reviews and features. I think in the next issue, which is out in a couple of weeks, I think there'll be 2 little bits in there. I'll be there, and there will be the odd article and things, but not a regular column. Always loved TV Zone and the recent Ace of Wands features. Can we have Children of the Stones, Sky and the Owl Service? I wrote a piece for Sky in the current Starburst, which is still out, and I will be covering it here. And Children of the Stones and the Owl Service, all on my list of things to do, so don't go away. Nice easy question from Ryan Tablet 7153. How's Rosie? Rosie is, as many of you will know, my cat, who sometimes gate crashes videos. I thought she might come in today, actually, now that I'm back in the house and upstairs. She's fine. She's absolutely fine. She's nearly 12. You'd think she was 3, the way she runs around and leaps about. She's nuts. But yeah, she's fit and furry. Gordon Williams comes in and says, my wife asked me to ask as well, when will she make her next cameo? Well, the thing is the cameos, you never know when they're coming. She will appear when you least expect it. Coming to the end now, kids. Dave AC. One thing you could cover, apologies if I should have checked your back episodes for this being already covered, is your studio / bookcase display case figures. What has pride of place or fun story attached? Also any signed books, video, audio, CDs or items, and a story about such if gotten at a meeting or con, any guest spots of yours on podcasts or panels you could point us towards. Yeah, I haven't really got much in the way of signed stuff. I do, this shows how I don't value these things really. A few years ago I started going to a couple of little convention things, and I got some signed photographs of some of the attendees, so I'm just reaching to get something, and I got a new binder, put the pictures in. I can't find the binder now, don't know what I've done with it. I got the pictures from the most recent convention I attended, which was Barry last year. I think I've showed you these last year. This is my autographed picture of Fraser Hines from Doctor Who. Autographed picture of Colin Spall, who appeared in Doctor Who. Autographed picture of Patrick Troughton's son, Michael Troughton. Autographed picture of Wendy Padbury. And autographed picture of Annette Badland. These will all end up in my binder when I eventually manage to track it down. So I don't really go in that much for signed stuff. He said, reaching for something else. I do have a copy of the paperback book of the Sunmakers Doctor Who book, which was signed by the lovely Louise Jameson when I saw her at an event just outside Cardiff a few years ago. I had to buy the book there because I didn't have a copy of it anymore. So yeah, I'm not a great one for collecting signed things, autographs and stuff like that, unless I go to an event, and then I will get something to commemorate going to see them. But I'm not big in terms of that sort of stuff. I've done a little video clip today of this messy room. I think I've done a couple of videos on my cinema room. I think that's all you need to see really of my messy stuff. What else we got? Any guest spots on podcasts or panels? There's a few. I did a few over the last few years. I did one last year for I think it's called the Doctor Who podcast. It's an American podcast. Can't think of the name of the guy who does it, sorry. It was mainly as I was a writer of one of the unofficial Doctor Who annuals, as was he. And he was doing profiles of all the other writers. And that's still online. Me chatting away for an hour. I did a piece for the Geeky Sci-fi group many years ago during pandemic, I think, talking about my favourite Doctor Who stories. And I also did another one which I'm not going to recommend because I don't approve of the podcast. It was one based in Birmingham. I did a video during lockdown about Doctor Who, but that channel has since turned out to be quite misogynistic and quite nasty. It's run by adults, but they speak very disparagingly about professional people in a way they wouldn't if they actually met them, and the nasty side of Doctor Who fandom. So I wouldn't wouldn't recommend you going to look for that one. I think it was an audio only one anyway, but there's only a few I've done. If anybody out there's got a podcast and wants to talk to me, then leave a message down below and we can sort something out, because of course I'm such a big star. Right, I think we're nearly there, kids. We're nearly there. You can go home. Hi Paul, been here for a while now. Enjoy your content. This is Godless Grandpa. Who are your favourite authors? I'm a big fan of Terry Pratchett. Did you like his works? I have to say I haven't read much Terry Pratchett. The only one of his I read many years ago was called Only You Can Save Mankind, which I think was sort of a young adult book about kids on computers. But I never read any of his other stuff. I'm not a big fan of sort of fantasy, that sort of fantasy type stuff that he did, especially the kind of call it Flat Earth, the Discworld stories. Never got into it. It just seemed a bit overwhelming, a bit too much. My favourite authors would be John Wyndham, who of course did Day of the Triffids and many other classic science fiction. H.G. Wells, because he's the godfather, the father of modern science fiction, really. I like a lot of James Herbert stuff. Modern authors, I quite like Tim Lebbon, who is a horror writer who lives quite locally to me. I think he lives in Monmouth. He did a favourite book of mine a few years ago called, it's got the deluxe edition of it, called The Silence. This is a terrific book. It was turned into a not very good Netflix film about sort of an undiscovered race of carnivorous bat creatures that emerge from a cave in Africa and swarm all over the world. It's an apocalyptic story. I love it. It's great. It's such a good story. And I've read several of his other books since, and they're very, very good. But there aren't really many authors in fact, there aren't any authors whose works I will pick up automatically. Having said that, I do like Bob Mortimer of Reeves and Mortimer, and he has written some great books over the last few years. He did his autobiography, and he did 2 comedy thriller novels. He has a third one called The Long Shoe out in October, and I do pre-buy his books because I think he's got a very good turn of phrase. You can hear his voice in the reading. And I also pick up books by Matt Haig. Some of his earlier books, better than his more recent ones. He did How to Stop Time a few years ago, which is a beautiful book if you've never read it. And The Radleys, which was turned into a not very good film. The Humans. His last 2 books, The Midnight Library and the more recent one, whose name I can't remember, wasn't so keen on. But I'll always take a look at his stuff because he's an interesting writer. Gordon Hudson, what do you think of Star Trek? It's a load of crap. Like I mentioned earlier, I dip in and out to Star Trek. I like the original series. I like Strange New Worlds. Everything else in between, I can take or leave. But it's not that I hate it. It's just, as I say, I'm not big on spacey science fiction particularly. On a similar vein, I think this is in fact the final question from Admiral Awesome DC. Hi Paul, great videos. I'm from South Wales as well. I have one question. Star Trek or Star Wars? Of course, when I saw these questions, I realised I haven't done any videos on either of these two. Considering their huge cultural importance in the genre, that is pretty shocking. So I will do some stuff on both of those at some point. As I said, I can watch Star Trek stuff. I can watch Star Wars. I've seen the Star Wars films, admittedly under sufferance. I watched The Mandalorian. I haven't watched any of the other Star Wars TV series. It's just not a world that connected with me. I think when Star Wars came along in 1977, it seemed to me to be threatening my beloved Doctor Who, and I didn't want to watch it. And when I did end up watching it, whatever its magic is, whatever its appeal is, didn't work on me, unfortunately. And I'm not disparaging it. I'm not saying it's bad. And I quite like some of the more recent films that people have hated. But I watch Star Wars stuff purely to be entertained, and I don't go in as a fan thinking it's going to be bad or wanting to hate it or screaming that it contradicts this or contradicts that. I'm very surface level in terms of Star Trek and Star Wars, so I probably wouldn't really choose between them. If I had to, it would probably be Star Trek because of the historical connection of watching it back in the 60s. I think that's it. That is it. Those are the questions. This has gone on much longer than I thought. I do apologise for that. I thought I might be able to knock it out in half an hour, but I wanted to answer your questions in detail because you were good enough to send them. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it hasn't been too dull for you. I hope I've given suitable and appropriate and interesting answers. Something I will do again. I'm not going to do it straight away. I'll do it, maybe in a year or so, or 6 months, depending on how the subscriber numbers go. They're climbing quite nicely at the moment. So thank you for everybody who's here. Thank you to everybody who watches, whether you're new, whether you're a trencherman who's been around since the beginning or the middle. Thank you very much for just being here. And particularly thank you to everybody who sent those questions. I did worry that nobody's going to ask anything because nobody cares. But it turns out that you do care and you do have interesting questions for me. So thank you very much for that. So that's me done for tonight. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. It's gone dark now. I will see you soon. Lots more stuff to come in the next week. It's been a bit quiet lately. I was tied up with stuff last week, so I didn't have a chance to sit down and watch and record. But there's a lot of stuff coming. So stick around. Until I see you next time, keep taking the stuff.